I don't believe that a single bit, not one iota. He was arrested in Spain. I mean, he knew he was going to end up back over here.
He was facing extradition on the tax charges. And so adding insult to injury, then they tacked on even more charges relating to a lot of the same type of conduct that we're seeing today from individuals like Elon Musk.
Welcome to BitBoy Crypto, home of the BitSquad, the largest crypto community in all the interwebs. My name is Ben. Every day on this channel, I show you how to make money in crypto. If you like money in crypto, make sure to hit that subscribe button. Today, we're actually going to shift gears a little bit as I brought on Andrew Gordon from Gordon Law, who represented John McAfee in his case against the SEC. They also serve as our CPA here at BitBoy Crypto, and we've gotten to know Andrew very well. John McAfee's death was as suspicious as it was tragic. Andrew had the opportunity to have many of the last phone conversations with John McAfee in his life. So today, we're going to be talking with Andrew about what happened, how John was doing, and the suspicious circumstances that many people are calling into question. There needs to be an investigation on what really happened because none of us are buying the official story. Let's find out if you do. All right, here we go. Let's jump into the interview. All right, everybody. I'm joined with Andrew today from Gordon Law Firm, prestigious law firm in Chicago. They represent us on some different stuff. So I've known Andrew for quite a while. Welcome to the show.
Well, thank you very much for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. I wish it was better circumstances that we
likewise.
were talking about, obviously. And, John McAfee was a large personality. And, there's a lot of things about him that were controversial, people didn't like, but, I had some interactions with him before and he was always extremely nice to me. And, we had good conversations. But there was another side going on for sure behind the scenes with all kinds of stuff that he was involved in that kind of led to some trouble for him down the road, whether it was, right or not. And you actually represent him. So if you could, Andrew, just tell everybody a little bit about, who you are and your relationship with John.
Sure. So my name again is Andrew Gordon, and I had the pleasure of working with John for at least the last 6 months or so, since the beginning of the year. And I was or am the lead counsel for his U.S. defense. And so John was charged originally with tax crimes out of Tennessee. And then more recently, a few months ago, New York also indicted him on charges related to securities. And so both of these allegations had a lot of different underpinnings in cryptocurrency. And so both on the tax side, the allegations were that he was receiving cryptocurrency, not reporting and paying on his taxes. And then similarly, the securities charges were related to cryptocurrency as well. And so over the last 6 months or so, we had been preparing for his defense in the United States to put forth his position as to these charges and fight for the truth and for his defense.
Yeah. And I know we have talked before, or I've talked with Max from your team as well, kind of about, the larger context of the whole thing and why, you thought that there was a great defense to be had for him. And, I guess where did you guys stand with, with the defense? Like, where were you at this time? Had you just told him something that was like, it was going to be hopeless for him to keep fighting or anything like that? Because the official story, just so everybody knows, is that he committed suicide. That's the official story that we've been given. I don't believe that a single bit, not one iota. I think most people that know John also believe that that's not true as well. But give us an update of where you were in the case.
Sure. So for the last 9 months or so, John's actually been in prison in Spain. He was arrested in Spain while trying to board a flight. Up until then, he has been in various different locations, but he was arrested about 9 months ago in Spain related to the U.S. charges. So the U.S. charges, the U.S. requested that basically anywhere in the world, any country that finds John, arrest him on site. And in fact, that's what Spain did. And over the last 9 months, he had been fighting his extradition from Spain to the United States. And so before a country can send you from one place to another, they need to make sure that they're complying with their local laws and their local constitution before doing so. And so that was the process that he was going through in Spain. But just to set expectations, no one had believed that he would be in Spain forever, or that the extradition would, at the end, be necessarily in full granted for him. And so we had been preparing for the fight in the United States. I was retained 6 months ago to prepare for that fight. And so leading up to the unfortunate circumstances, there was a ruling in Spain. And so the Spanish court did order his extradition, but it was not unexpected. In fact, that was what we were preparing for. That's why I was hired. That's why I was paid. And over the last few months, we had been actively and in earnest preparing for the defense in his cases, talking with him, talking with his wife, and preparing for these steps. And so while the news from the Spanish court was unfortunate, we all wish that he would have had a more favorable ruling in Spain and been able to stay in Spain, or perhaps been released, but it was not unexpected. So the news reports that it was some sort of shock and that he was left without options is just a pure mischaracterization, because we had options. We even had plans for an appeal in Spain, but Spain aside, we were ready for the fight in the United States.
Yeah, once again, it's laughable. Like, obviously, when he was arrested in Spain, I mean, he knew he was going to end up back over here. I mean, he didn't think the Spanish government was going to stand up for him. You know, I mean, they arrested him. They were going to send him back to America. It was very obvious from the very beginning. He tried to stay on the run as much as he could, stayed on the run. Now, let's get in, before we go into kind of the finer details of, you know, your last conversations with him and you know, I mean, obviously you care about him. You care about this story because, like you said, you've already been paid and, you know, he's now no longer with us. You don't have to come on here and fight for him. You know, you don't have to come on here and, you know, explain anything. You know, pretty much, I guess the legal cases are what they are at this point. But to me, it seems like this is the United States going after someone that's in the mafia for, you know, tax evasion. Like, really, they've just decided they want to come after this person no matter what. And they're going to figure out any kind of rule or any kind of law that they can do to pin him down, especially when you have John McAfee, who's been so bold and outspoken against the U.S. government. What role do you think his kind of position, you know, like calling out the SEC, calling out the CFTC, calling out the government, saying he won't pay taxes? What did that role of his attitude towards the government, you think, play in, number one, his arrest, and then number two, you know, possibly in, you know, I don't know, whatever happened to him?
Sure. So I think it's without question that it had impact. While his case was not the first crypto criminal tax indictment, it was certainly the most high profile. And if you look at the allegations of the complaint itself, it's quite sparse. It talks about millions of dollars that he received in revenue that was allegedly unreported. But there's a whole lot more to the story, and the IRS knows that. The Department of Treasury knows that just receiving revenue doesn't mean necessarily there's a tax obligation. And so they were very aggressive in terms of the indictment. It was filed under seal. He was not informed that he had the indictment. We were not informed as his counsel. Similarly, New York also added more and more charges. He was in Spain. He was facing extradition on the tax charges. And so adding insult to injury, then they tacked on even more charges relating to a lot of the same type of conduct that we're seeing today from individuals like Elon Musk. Yeah. And yet John became that public enemy. And so we don't have any evidence, and I can't say it's because he posted these things on Twitter that he had these charges, but without question, it made him more of a public enemy of the state.
Yeah, well, Elon Musk has certainly done more to manipulate the crypto markets and, you know, said more things against the SEC, more powerful things. He got bigger following, he got more money. But yeah, he just seems to keep skating by, the muskrat, as I call him. So, okay, let's get into, you know, I want to know, like, how is its countenance? Because to me, okay, when you look at people, you know, whether it was the guy who supposedly hung himself in a jail in New York City, that's very famous, that I don't even want to say his name on the channel, to John, like, to me, neither one of these are guys that strike myself as someone who would commit suicide. I believe that John thought he was going to get out of this by the end of it. I think he hired you. You're a great attorney. I thought the whole time that he really believed he was going to be able to fight this and he was going to win. And it just didn't seem consistent that he would just give up, and take his own life. So from your perspective, how was he in the, leading up to this event? How was his attitude? Was there any warning signs or anything that you could be like, well, I could kind of see this, or do you believe there's zero chance that he actually committed suicide?
Well, there's some things that we know because John told us publicly, and I don't mean me specifically, but everyone through his tweets.
Mm-hmm.
And so we've known over the last few months and even over the last year that he feared for his life and that there were threats against him. He tweeted that he put together terabytes of data about public officials, and if something happened to him, that would be released. He tattooed himself and basically tweeted that if a suicide occurred, it would be not by his hands. Mm-hmm. So from that, we, not just me as his attorney, but everyone out there can see this was an individual that feared the possibility of something like this occurring. And to answer your questions, I can't divulge too much about the types of conversations that we had, but there are some things I can share with you. And one of those things is of the day of the event, Janice, John's wife, spoke to him twice. And during those conversations, there was nothing that would indicate that something like this would happen. In fact, they were supposed to have a third phone call before he went to bed, as would often happen. They were planning to have it. That phone call never occurred. Yeah. Based on that, there's nothing to suggest that this would have happened. Again, there was an unfortunate court ruling that day, but not unexpected. It wasn't the end of the line. And there was supposed to be a third phone call with his wife.
Well, and, something that is, typical, I know it's such a dark subject here, but something that is typical, are goodbyes. I know a few people who have committed suicide, some fairly recently. And there were definitely, when the people around them looked back on their last conversations with that person, they looked and they said, that's why they said that. Or, that was his way of saying goodbye, or whatever the case may be. And so the fact that, like what I read in an article, was that, his last words to Janice were, okay, well, I'll talk to you later tonight. Right. That doesn't sound like, someone that, is contemplating even what is happening here, what, supposedly did happen. What do you think happened? What, that's the question.
Yeah. I don't want to speculate, but, being the advocate for John and looking to his concerns, he certainly didn't believe that if something happened, it would be by his own hand. And so Janice has publicly asked for an independent autopsy and an investigation. There has been an autopsy conducted in Spain, but we don't really view that as being sufficient. And we're asking for an independent one to be conducted. And until that occurs, there really is no investigation, because right now the autopsy ruled that it was a suicide. And so typically there's not an investigation in a suicide. So that's what we're looking for, is a thorough investigation, because there is more to the story. As you've said it as well, the facts surrounding this don't suggest that it was a suicide. And so as John's advocate and trying to echo his final words and some of his final tweets, we're trying to get that message out there and make sure that a full investigation occurs before and not let his memory just fade away.
Yeah. Okay. So I'm going to ask you a very dark question, because everything that I've read just says suicide. Now, we know with the gentleman in New York that was in a lot of trouble, that did a lot of bad things, that hung himself, when the cameras just happened to be off, he hung himself. That was what it said. I've not read anything that actually says what the method was. I'm assuming it was hanging.
Yes. That is the allegation from the prison and from the autopsy.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. So very, very, very sad situation there. But the other question I wanted to ask you about this is, right after this occurred, on John's Instagram, there was a post that just had one letter on it. And I know it's not a letter I say on this channel either. A lot of people wouldn't know what that post is. People can look it up. who had access? Who do we know who it was that put that out there? Was there a message behind that you know of, or do you know just as much about that as anyone that saw the post?
Yeah, unfortunately, I know just as much as you and everyone else. Yeah, it was unusual. Perhaps it's something, perhaps it could be nothing.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'm unfortunately not sure.
Gotcha. So I guess here's the crux of the matter. What did John know that people didn't want him to say? I think that's what we're all wondering. Do you have any insight? I mean, the terabytes of data were mentioned. Do you think there's something to that? Do you think that was just him, throwing out, random kind of threats or words, or like, do you think John knew stuff that could have gotten him in trouble?
Well, there's only so much that I can share publicly
Right.
as well. But
we appreciate anything you will share.
Sure. Well, what John has put out there, I have no reason to believe it to be not factual or true. So, he wanted it to be known that he had terabytes of data and information on different political officials out there. And so I think there's that. And then also what we were preparing for in the US, which was to be a very public trial on some key legal issues related to cryptocurrency and tax. John made it very known that he disagreed with the tax system as it is today, and how certain aspects of the law are interpreted with respect to cryptocurrency. And we were planning for that fight. And similarly in New York, with respect to some of the charges there, it was to be a very public trial with different positions presented, and we won't have the opportunity to do that.
Well, and that really opens up the Pandora's box of who potentially could be responsible for this. I don't know who it is. I certainly believe John did not die at his own hand. I mean, I will say that very, very clearly. I think the evidence is very overwhelming that he didn't. But the thing is this case, and I said for a long time, this case was going to have shockwaves. It was going to be precedent that was going to be set across the crypto landscape for influencers, crypto tax, for, disclosure of sponsorships. It was going to provide a backbone of regulation for people like me, for what I do. Like we're not really clear on this channel about what we're allowed and what we're not allowed to do. I know in the history of this channel, literally every single time we've done a sponsored video, we've disclosed that, because I never want to end up in that situation where, there is ambiguity. So we make sure, even though there's not regulation telling us what to do, that we go above board and go out of our way to do it. And now we're not going to get this. And so that could have, some, that's just me personally, how this affects me. But for the larger landscape of crypto, there were going to be a lot of effects from this. And now they're not going to be known. Where do you think we go from here?
Absolutely. And unfortunately, this will not be the opportunity. John will not have the opportunity to have that fight, but I'm confident in time there will be others that will challenge these different aspects, and there will be new precedent and case law set. Unfortunately, in the United States, we are required to follow the law, but in many circumstances, especially in crypto, it's hard to understand or interpret that law as it applies to our new situations or new technology. It's through case law. It's often through challenging the law, or being a target of the government and defending it, that we then see those precedents, and we're just able to see how the law is actually applied to certain individuals. And so unfortunately, we won't have that opportunity now through John, but I'm sure it will happen in time.
Well, hopefully it's not through me. I would not like to be. I would not like to be. I don't envy the position that John was in, obviously. And like I said, I've always kept that in the back of my mind with everything I've done on the history of this channel is, we don't have that regulation. So we got to be careful about the way that we do things. And I think I've tried to do everything in a way that I don't end up in that position. I'm very confident I won't. But the fact there is lack of regulation, I mean, it does leave a lot of ambiguity. And I certainly don't think the government is going to come in and do anything that is retroactive, like once they do make regulation. But I think the people that are clear scammers out there, that are clearly, lying about, promotions or lying about things like that, I mean, those people I think should be held responsible in some regard, so I don't think it's a bad thing. Well, Andrew, it's definitely been, very insightful, listening to you talk about what this case would have meant, what John went through. Is there anything you want to leave us with about John or this case?
Yeah, John was a pioneer Although he was an influencer, I don't think that that's necessarily the proper characterization, because he truly was a pioneer and has done a lot to grow the cryptocurrency space. That today in 2021, we forget about those days in 16, 17,
Yeah.
and the vocal individuals that were driving the growth during those years. And so a lot of what we have today is because of people like John and the pioneers of cryptocurrency. And so I would just hope that his message and what he stood for is not forgotten, and certainly not swept away because of a report of a suicide. There's more to it, and we hope that an investigation occurs and those facts come out.
Well, I know one thing. I know that because none of us believe what the story is, and because of everything surrounding his death now, I think we can all say that from this point, the legend of John McAfee will grow and it will continue, and he's definitely left a legacy. He was a pioneer. A lot of people don't like him. A lot of people, there's a lot of controversial stuff about him for sure. There's things about him I didn't like for sure. Mm-hmm. But he was always very nice, always treated me with respect, and you're 100% accurate. Crypto would not be where it is today without him pushing it forward at different times. So Andrew, thank you so much for joining us today. And for everybody else, hey, drop your comments down below. I want to know from the audience what you think John McAfee meant to crypto. And I also want to know, what do you guys think that the real story is? All right, guys, that's all I got. Make sure to like this video. Be blessed. BitBoy out.